Hi, I'm Audrey Ramirez Loudenbach, and my sign name is this. So I wanted to talk about the topic of values and how that impacts our decision making when it comes to interpreting work specifically. What happens in our background will affect our values, and with that, we can internalize some of our values and start to analyze it for our interpreting work. Let's start with an interpreting program in West Oregon University. So in my gut, I felt a motivation to go and chase interpreting work. And I felt like it was important to impact how we perceive and analyze our work going forward. So I started doing research and I found the topic of values in terms of motivation to show up a lot. So a lot of the research supports values and how it affects decisions moving forward. And sometimes we can miss how values affect us, and we don't notice it because it's in the back of our minds. But sometimes we need to just take a little bit of self-analyzing and sort of try to understand how those values affect our everyday work. So I put out a survey for people to fill out on what their value system is like. And what that value system means is just a list of values and how you prioritize them. So I wanted to establish a value system for each person that we talk to. My survey included 3 parts. So the first part was filling out 40 questions regarding your value system for each person. The second part was a demographic question, and the third part was open-ended questions asking each person to drop their reasoning for becoming an interpreter. So altogether, I got 298 responses to my survey. One interesting thing related to survey question number 3, most responses to that question of why you became an interpreter, it didn't always match the values in the first section where they were filling out their value system. So many people responded for open questions as to why they become an interpreter. They respond with, "Oh, I fell in love with sign language." But their value system in that answer didn't match the first section of the survey. I found that part of it to be particularly interesting, and I thought it'd be important for us to discuss what that means. And I think it's interesting how our motivation for becoming an interpreter does not match up with our values a lot of times. So it's worth discussing. There's in a lot of research, I found the discussion of values with jobs to not always or to I found the values to match up with your job, and they find it to be fulfilling work. So it's important that we think about and analyze why we became interpreters and if our values fit that kind of work. And I think if we can get those two to match up, then it would be a lot more satisfactory and we could, have happier careers moving forward. I think it would also be helpful for interpreters to analyze themselves and their values and how they can express that in their decision making with chasing interpreting, plus where they want to work later in life or which careers match up their lifestyle. So I think that's part of the self-analysis that we need to look into. Here's another interesting thing that popped up in my survey. I noticed that there are a few groups of people in the survey who they themselves did not identify as white for the ethnic or ethnicity background. So in my survey, around 89% of responses identified themselves as white. So a much smaller group identified it as other ethnic backgrounds. One interesting thing I noticed is that those two groups, the first identified themselves as Latino or Hispanic, and the second group identified themselves as Asian American. Those two groups had similar value systems to those two had very similar value systems that included a lot of conformity with respect to authority and respect to rules. So going forward, I want to encourage some of that moving forward. So in the survey where I had 298 responses, the average response for the value system of conformity as to where it was in their priority list was 5th out of 10. The top overall group for conformity, or for some groups it was their top, however, overall it was 5th, and there's a big difference between those two. And I wanted to look into this disparity and how the value system for that was most common and discuss how it's possible to prevent other people from going into their backgrounds with their value systems. So I want to encourage some variance in interpreting backgrounds and respect and honor their value system and how it's different. For a while now in my work, I've involved a lot of supervision for interpreting. Meaning like a group of interpreters will get together, they'll discuss their work and their ethics and how they have, or some ethical conflicts maybe. And with those ethical conflicts, it can sometimes bring perspective through your values. So Schwartz, his model and value for values, explains how values can create conflicts and how that tends to create internal conflicts when it comes to interpreting work in particular. Internally, I feel like there's a lot of conflicts between values when you're not sure what value to even pick. If you think that your value doesn't match up with with a potential interpreting job or a customer, their value system doesn't match up, sometimes it can be awkward and cause some internal conflict. So I wanted to include that part of the discussion of values is looking at the ethical conflicts that could come from it. I also want to encourage new interpreters to really start thinking and analyzing about their value system. Because it can really impact your work moving forward. We all benefit from self-analysis and understanding who we are, and we would all better ourselves from that. And one great way to do that is through analyzing our values. So if we can start having a common understanding of our value system, it'd have really important impact on our everyday jobs and life. Okay, I think we can probably just call it here. 11 minutes.